Good morning. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at NASDAQ. And for this edition of Trade Talks, we are going to talk about luxury retail trends, the business of luxury, social media, technology, New York Fashion Week. We're going to talk about it all with David Arnold. He's the Managing Director of Robb Report. David, I want to thank you for joining me over at MarketSite.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Good
morning.
Let all of you know, Robb Report, this is such a favorite at NASDAQ headquarters, particularly last issue with the collectible cars. Standing around my desk, it was a lot of incentive to do very well in life or win the lottery. So
absolutely.
We love when Robb Report comes out over at NASDAQ. But let's talk about New York Fashion Week, luxury trends. There was an interesting piece in the New York Times that New York Fashion Week is potentially in a decline. I don't think I'd ever read words like that.
Well, it's an interesting, it's a big business, first of all. It brings almost $1 billion into New York, so it is business, and we mustn't forget about that. But it has become a little bit of a circus, and certainly the amount of personalities around it. But, you know, fashion's an important business globally. You've got the New York Fashion Show, you've got London, you've got Paris, you've got Milan, and there is a circus troupe that follows a procession of these big fashion shows. But what's important now and what's an interesting trend is brands like Ralph Lauren and Burberry is the kind of see now and buy now. That's become extremely important, and Ralph Lauren has really kind of pioneered. In fact, what Ralph's doing this year is very different. To celebrate his 50th anniversary, his fashion show is very small. It's up at his home in Bedford. It's going to be live streamed, and what you see, you can click and you can buy. And that's a trend that's starting to get a lot of attention. Instant gratification is very important, as we know, and so we'll see how that trends over the next few years. But you know, fashion shows, big business. Fashion's an enormous business, so
right, well, it's
not going away anytime soon.
We're an on-demand economy.
Totally.
And to see the exclusivity and get on-demand 2-hour delivery of clothing on this level. But my question to you is, has social media, the blogosphere, has that taken away some of the exclusivity of high-end fashion like this?
It has. I mean, I think people live vicariously. Obviously, we know that through social media. What you see at the fashion shows, which has changed, and I've been fortunate enough to have been at these shows for a number of years, is you will see in the past, you know, only the buyers and the editors of major fashion magazines sitting in the front rows. Well, that's not the case anymore. You see the bloggers, you see the influencers, and the fashion brands are courting them and paying them to attend the shows because they do have huge following. What has not been proven is, you know, what the influencers actually do in terms of moving retail sales, and there's a lot of debate about whether that really does have an impact and what that is doing. But more and more influencers and bloggers and social media mavens are flocking to the shows, and so we're not going to see any slowdown in that over the next several years, certainly.
Well, I want to ask you how this works. So you see these outrageous outfits on the runway, the amazing makeup, the hair. I've yet to see anyone on the street, even in Manhattan, mimic what you see on the runway. So how does that determine what fashion is going to be for the seasons and what we see in the store?
It certainly, it creates certainly conversation. But you know, for those of us that live in New York, I think it's difficult to tell because most of us are all wearing the uniform of New York, which is black or gray. And so you walk out into the streets of New York, even in the summer, and we're all wearing that uniform. But it's hard for us, I think, that live in New York and spend most of the time in New York to realize what's going on. If you go to Florida, if you go to Orange County, there is a lot of color. People aren't wearing black. The climate doesn't really allow for it. And so it's sometimes difficult for us to see what's going on unless we're there in other parts of the country. You will see some of the more outlandish fashions in cities like Paris, London, and Milan, but it's certainly not a critical mass. So it's to certainly promote conversation, and we certainly shouldn't forget that in fashion, it's not necessarily the ready-to-wear that controls the lion's share of the sales. It's all of the business that's behind that, and in terms of sales actually in front of it, it's the accessories, it's the fragrance, it's all of the things that have the same brand, but aren't necessarily the ready-to-wear business.
All right, let's talk about what's in Robb Report.
Sure.
Because this is about the guys this time.
It's always about the guys.
I've noticed an uptick in publications talking about bespoke, not cut to wear of existing fabric, but actual bespoke material. It seems to be like it's building out in terms of a trend.
It certainly is. And if you go back 10 years, there were a couple of companies that were renowned for bespoke. What we've done here is we've taken a look at the tailors in the major cities in Italy. So we've gone to Rome, we've gone to Naples, we've gone to Milan, and we've gone to Florence, and we've talked to the preeminent tailors that have done bespoke and been in the bespoke business forever, but more and more of them are offering their services to customers in New York. It used to be quiet. It's never inexpensive. It's certainly worth it. But to actually have something that's created just for you, just for your silhouette, from scratch, you know, you have your own pattern that's just made for you, is something that's very special. It does require an investment in time. And as I said, it's not inexpensive, but it's certainly worth it. And more men are looking for that. They're looking for that individuality. They're looking for the range of fabrics, which is almost limitless. Certainly the fabric companies have created some wonderful fabrics. The range, as I said, is almost unlimited, thousands of fabrics. And guys want something that's a little different. It makes them stand out, makes them feel wonderful.
Do you think longer term bespoke will see growth? Because it feels as if everyone's very casual these days, or there certainly will always be a market?
There'll always be a market, and the market has been exploding. Granted, it's a very small base, and so exponentially the numbers are, in terms of percentage growth, it's a huge explosion. But more and more companies are investing resources in this, and the margins are very healthy, not surprisingly, and so they're very interested. The ready-to-wear business is challenged in general, and certainly at retail there isn't much happening that's terribly exciting for a lot of these companies, and so I think the inspiration when you go into a retail environment is a little challenged. And so when you go into some of these specialty stores and you have the opportunity to spend time with a tailor, the experience overall is just much more interesting, engaging, and exciting. And so once you've started to select the fabrics and go through the wardrobing process, the likelihood of you buying all of the accessories that go along with that are much greater. You need the shoes. You know, it's like when you start to renovate a house, you do one Reuben. Everything else looks a little shabby, and that's the way it works similarly when you start to invest in a bespoke wardrobe.
It's really interesting that you're talking about retail, because we talk about stocks all the time here and how we have the Amazon impact on brick and mortar retail.
Sure.
Clearly that's a different level than what we're discussing here, but going back to Fashion Week and the runways, it used to be the department stores that were in the front row and sort of dictating who was buying and what the trends were going to be. It doesn't seem like that's the case anymore. It
isn't. The specialty stores, if we're talking about the men's business, the specialty stores are really seeing a resurgence because they are carrying different types of merchandise. One of the challenges that has been recognized in the department stores is they're all carrying pretty much the same merchandise, and so it becomes commoditized, and everything's always on sale. You'd be hard-pressed to find full-price merchandise in some of the retail stores, and so we are training customers to wait for sales, wait for coupons. That's certainly been a challenge which they're trying to address. It's hard to wean people off of that because why would you pay for full-price merchandise? The other issue that you have in fashion in particular is the manufacturing and delivery of merchandise. So in New York, for example, in late July, you'll start to see pre-fall. It's 100 degrees outside. You're not buying, most people aren't buying a fall wardrobe in late July, early August, and by the time the weather is seasonably cold, everything's on sale. And that's a real challenge. But changing that whole system requires such an overhaul of the manufacturing process that you need thousands upon thousands of people to actually work together cooperatively. And again, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us
You're very
at
welcome.
NASDAQ.
Thank you.
And always, thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at NASDAQ.